Thanks very much, Don, and thanks to everyone for joining the webinar today. So I'm Owen Rose, I'm a partner at Acteon, and for those of you who don't know us, we are a bespoke blended learning solutions provider based in sunny Cambridge, sunny today anyway at the moment, and the project that I'm going to be highlighting today in this case study is one which has certainly, I think, tested the full range of our capabilities. So for those of you who don't know about us, hopefully by the end of it you'll get a pretty good feel for the kind of work that we do and what we're trying to help our clients achieve. So for the past couple of years we've been fortunate to be in a very exciting partnership with a UK care provider called HC1, and we've been helping them make learning a driver of business transformation. And what the case study I'm going to take you through is a learning development project that's really had a massive impact for that organisation and its people. And so what I want to do today really is to share the story of the project, and in doing that I hope to be able to highlight some of the key success factors, the things that have made it so effective, and I hope through doing that to be able to share some ideas and maybe some practical things that we did with HC1 that might be relevant or useful with the kind of challenges that you have in implementing learning technologies and learning and development in general. So I'll go through the story. I think this will probably take hopefully about 20-25 minutes, and then hopefully we can. It is quite a significant project. There's an awful lot going on in it, so inevitably it'll be quite a kind of high level rush through it. But I hope to leave plenty of time at the end so we can pick up maybe on questions around specific areas. So let's get on with the story. And it's a story with a pretty tough beginning really, because it starts in the collapse of Southern Cross, who 2.5 years ago or so were the UK's biggest care home operator, and the UK-based members of the audience may well remember the well-publicised demise of that care company. Now in their case, the demise was actually brought about by financial mismanagement. It wasn't around issues of service quality or safety, but inevitably the collapse of a company like that had very significant effects on staff morale and engagement. So consequently, of course, there were inevitable risks to service quality and safety. And that issue, that central issue really of the engagement of staff, their accountability, their morale, their motivation, and the connection between that and quality and safety is a really big issue in care generally in the UK at the moment. And I'm sure again the UK-based members of you will be very familiar. It's a frequent news story about issues in the care sector. Highlighted perhaps the most well-known case perhaps is the scandal in Mid-Staff's Healthcare Trust, which ended in a tragedy. Now, it's important to say that at Southern Cross there wasn't a tragedy. Fortunately, crisis was averted by other operators stepping in to take over the running of those care homes. And the story today really is about one of those operators. So HC1 were a new company. They were created on the 1st of November 2011 to take over just over 230 of the former Southern Cross care homes. And on the day they were created, HC1 became the third largest care home operator in the UK. So they employ about 15,000 people, and they're looking after just over 10,000 residents. And so again, on the day they were created, HC1 inherited those challenges of re-engaging staff, re-motivating staff, and ensuring the quality and safety of services. And to meet that challenge, they set the whole company a very clear mission. And that was to become the kindest care home operator in the UK. And they challenged every part of the business to address and meet that vision. And right from the start, well, they put learning and development at the heart of doing that. And in particular, and perhaps quite bravely for a company in their sector and their working environment, they wanted to put learning technologies and e-learning at the heart of realising that vision. They wanted to use the power and the reach that learning technologies provide to rapidly reach every colleague in this very large and widely distributed organisation with the new vision and values. And they saw e-learning as a powerful way of doing that. And that's when Acteon became involved in the story. We had previously worked very successfully with the management company behind HC1, so they knew what we could do, and we became their learning partner on this journey. So throughout the story, when I'm talking about the we that I'm talking about is a kind of amalgamation of Acteon's consultants and our team with the learning and development team at HC1. So that was the challenge on the 1st of November 2011, and if we skip forward 10 months, HC1 launched Touch. Now Touch is a blended corporate learning program with a core of e-learning. And Touch delivers to the business a huge range of both mandatory and specialist training. So mandatory training for a provider like HC1 is things like health and safety, infection control, food safety, those kind of subject areas. Specialist areas would be things like caring for people with dementia, care planning, wound care, these kind of things. So Touch is the platform for all learning and development at HC1. And it's using technology to embed that learning in the workplace and to really empower colleagues to take control of their learning. And whilst doing that, it is carrying out across the whole business the new vision and values of the organisation. And it's had a fantastic response. So it's a blended program. It combines e-learning with offline learning activities, with classrooms, workshops, movies, things that I'll touch on later on as we go through the presentation. Had fantastic response from colleagues, and it's had a huge impact for the organisation, and I'll be highlighting some of the areas of impact later on.
Quick question, and I don't normally interrupt the speakers to ask a question, but a question just popped up. How large is Acteon as a company?
Acteon as a company? Oh yeah, we have 27 colleagues. So with 27 people, we have in-house studio, we have in-house development team, and a core of our project consultants. But we also have a very tried and tested network of suppliers and partners that we reach out to, which helps us to stay agile and responsive. So we're 27, but with sitting in a network of very talented people.
Thanks very much.
Okay. So that's us. So in a sense, I've skipped to the end of the book and then revealed the punchline really by telling you what the outcome was of Touch. And it's been a very impactful project. As I said, it's had extensive recognition. So we were fortunate to win 2 Gold Awards at the e-learning awards last year, including Best E-learning Project. We won a number of awards at the Training Journal, and in I think it was March or April this year, Alison Innes-Farquhar, who led the project and is head of people at HC1, became the Chief Learning Officer of the Year at the Learning Awards. So, okay, here we are. It's been a hugely impactful project, impactful for the organisation, impactful for individuals. But what I really want to focus on today is how was that achieved? So given all of the challenges that this organisation faced, how were such successful outcomes achieved so quickly?
And I just want to say at this point, I know people are sitting forward on their seats saying with 2 things in their minds, which have already cropped up in the chat. One is, what was the measurable outcome? And I can assure you, measurements are going to appear later on. We discussed that earlier, didn't we, Owen? We knew that was going to.
Absolutely, yeah. That is the punchline. So I don't want to get there too quickly. Yeah.
We'll have that later on. And also, Fiona's raised the issue, which I'm not asking you to answer right now, but it's something that's going to be in everybody's mind, particularly in the UK. Given all the scandals in care homes, how do you know it's improved patient care? So these are 2 things that are very much in people's minds. Owen, I'm hoping, I'm trusting that you're going to be able to answer both those questions.
Well, certainly, and those are the kind of impacts that we're going to come to, because those are the central issues. And I'll certainly be talking about that quite a bit, but also be talking about the challenges that still exist as well. So yes, we'll come on to that.
Thanks.
Okay, so I guess really into the meat of the case study really, which was what kind of approaches did we use and working with HC1 to address these very significant challenges to business turnaround, and implementing learning and indeed implementing e-learning. So, and the challenges were very significant. So you can imagine a care business like HC1 is a people-focused business. So its colleagues on the whole are people. They don't routinely use technology in the workplace. They don't expect to use technology in the workplace. And in fact, there is a general and widespread resistance to learning technologies within the care sector. You can imagine what the working environment is like. These are not people sitting at desks with routine access to devices and to network. And indeed, as you would expect really in this sort of environment, there is a lack of infrastructure generally, both hardware and network infrastructure. So when we first engaged with HC1, typically a care home would have one computer, and that would be sitting in the manager's office. So there were very significant challenges, and it's really the approaches we use to overcome those that I want to focus on, and two strands in particular, because we felt these are two strands that apply to so much of learning and development and make the difference between effective and not effective solutions. And that was to build alignment and engagement into everything that we did. So alignment means aligning all that you're doing with the needs of the business and focusing it on delivering that vision of the kindest care. And engagement meant building engagement with stakeholders at all levels across the company and showing them how learning could make a difference to them and for the organisation. So those are the two strands that I want to pick out. Alignment and engagement. And I thought it'd be good to share maybe here what others are doing to try and build alignment and to build engagement. So maybe these are themes to think about as we go through the presentation. I'm going to highlight some of the things we did working with HC1, but perhaps you can be thinking about the things that you're doing in your organisations to try and achieve these two outcomes. And maybe we can talk about some of them as we go, or talk more about them at the end. So maybe keep these two questions in mind as we go through. Okay, so the project started really, in terms of building these two outcomes, the project started with really trying to understand the organisation and its learners. So Alison, the head of people, conducted extensive visits to homes across the organisation to meet people, to talk about where they were, to understand the kind of challenges that they had, what the infrastructure was like, what their previous experiences of learning and development had been like. There was a lot of interaction with the board to understand business objectives, and there was a full evaluation of the existing learning provision. And crucially, another particular intervention that we used was to establish a working party of stakeholders from across the business. So these were 20 colleagues from HC1, all different levels from within the business, different roles from within the business. And the working party was used to guide the development of the project. And a key outcome from this initial period of research and evaluation and engagement with our working party were three guiding principles that guided every aspect of the project. So what I want to do now is look at each of these guiding principles in turn and talk about some of the practical things that we used to try and fulfill them. So let's take them one by one. And I think they're things that apply so broadly, generally, in learning and development. So the first guiding principle was that we would move from a culture of training for compliance to a culture of training for quality and kindness. So this was really about, and this is absolutely about aligning the learning and development with that vision to deliver the kindest care. Because one of the things that perhaps you've experienced in your organisations, and we heard it directly articulated from members of our working party, was this idea that colleagues feel, well, training is what I do in the training room, that's a kind of distinct activity, and then I go back to the workplace and I do what we always did, or what my manager tells me we should do. And it was overcoming that barrier, crossing that distinction that we wanted to achieve above all. And that's one of the ways we refer to this at Acteon as well is building competent compliance. So we don't want to just tick boxes and say yes, somebody's done their training and so we believe they're compliant. We want to build competence so that people are actually carrying out those actions in the workplace. So what were some of the practical ways we tried to fulfil and build this culture of training for quality and kindness? Well, really they were about linking every learning experience back to that vision of delivering the kindest care. Because we took a bespoke approach and all the materials of the program were created specifically for HC1, we could literally write those messages into the learning materials. So all of the learning materials that HC1 use feature their photography of their people and their places, their terminology. They feature case studies and scenarios relevant to their work, and we are literally able to weave into those messages of how this learning or this particular action is helping you to make a difference to someone's life. So, for example, even if subjects as dry as things like infection control, relating washing your hands properly back to the health and safety of that resident who you work with every day, who you care for, who you're very fond of, and making that connection between someone's personal vocational motivation and the ultimate goal of the organisation. So it was really embedding vision and values throughout all of the learning materials. Another crucial practical aspect of that was localising it as well, taking the learning down to the specific experience of the learner. So using linked learning activities, so e-learning linked to practical learning activities. These are tasks and exercises that people carry out in the workplace to practice the generic skills and messages which are covered in the e-learning. So these were some of the approaches we used to try and embed this link between learning and development and delivering the kindest care. So connecting the learning to that vocational driver for people. The second guiding principle was to embed learning in the work experience rather than simply provide training. And this is an area where learning technologies were incredibly powerful. So for HC1, like so many care organisations and lots of other organisations too, perhaps your organisation, training typically was a classroom-based activity and hence was separate from the workplace. Learning was something that happened outside of the workplace. And obviously, learning technologies are very powerful for overcoming that divide. So we were able to, by placing learning in the workplace through the computers that were available there and by making additional computers and devices available, we were able to integrate learning with shifts. So people were staying on task, on shift, and able to complete their learning in the workplace. We've subsequently been working with HC1 to make the learning mobile, to bring in people to allow their own devices or devices that are provided at work. And we've had a fantastic response to that. And we're finding that a lot of people are actually completing the learning in their own time, even though there's no requirement. HC1 are not making any requirement that they do that. But people are finding their own ways to complete the learning within and around their work. And a key outcome from this for them is that it means they get to spend more time with residents, more time on shift, more time working with the people that they care for, which is the reason that most of them are doing that work in the first place. And you can imagine that it's had a massive impact for night shift workers and people like that who previously had a great deal of difficulty in accessing training, learning and training opportunities. The other crucial step that learning technologies have allowed us to take is to empower managers to fulfill the requirements they have for developing their people. So we've been able to devolve the management of learning and delivery of learning down to the level of the care home. That's empowered managers to take control of their teams and develop them. So that's been a hugely positive impact for the organisation. So moving on to the third key principle. We wanted to move beyond the module, using and use the most appropriate channel to meet a learning need. And I guess with hindsight, a way we perhaps could have phrased this better was to say to move beyond the one-hit experience. Because again, for care companies like HC1 previously and so many other companies, training was seen as a one-hit experience. So if you're doing your infection control course or your wound care course, you go and do that in a classroom and that's it. You might refresh it again in a year's time, but that's the box tick, that's you done with training. And we know well enough that that isn't really how you build competency or change behaviour. And so we really wanted to utilise a full blend of learning channels to move beyond that one-hit experience and embed learning and development into the workplace. So yes, we use the core of e-learning courses, and most of the courses that, the online courses that HC1 run have as it were, a conventional e-learning module that's at the heart of them. So that's using the kind of interactivity and multimedia that you would expect. But around that, we're building lots of other channels to help embed and sustain the learning experience. So, for example, we have a video-based learning channel called HC1 TV, and a lot of that is using very experienced colleagues to demonstrate best practice and share their experiences. We have a little sort of high-impact movie channel. We call it Touchstone Pictures. It's been hugely effective. These are little, very, very short, usually a minute to 2 minute animated movies that reinforce critical learning messages. And they do that usually in a slightly quirky or humorous way, and they're really designed to grab attention and reinforce a very simple message. So, for example, we've got Sherlock Holmes investigating pressure sores, we've got Mary Poppins cleaning up the medicines cabinet, and things like that. And those have proved really powerful for reinforcing learning messages, but also they kind of go viral, and they get people engaged with the whole experience. So colleagues are telling each other, oh, have you seen the new mini-movie? Have you seen the Sherlock Holmes one? Go online, check that out. So they've been a very powerful tool. And we're also integrating learning technologies with a whole range of offline learning opportunities as well. So I've already talked about learning activities. We're using coaching tools and conversation cards and other sorts of interventions to allow managers to sustain learning in the workplace and to localize learning to specific needs. So moving beyond the module, using a blend of learning channels to support and sustain competency development and behaviour change has been a really powerful aspect of Touch at HC1. So those were the three guiding principles, and everything we were doing there was aimed at building these critical strands of alignment and engagement. But there is another strand that I want to touch on, the final part really, another critical success factor. And Don's already trailed it really, which is the importance of communication when you're seeking to achieve a change like this or any kind of transformation. And Don's right to say that at Acteon we've always made this a fundamental part of the work that we do with clients. So yes, we're trying to create great learning experiences which are connected to clear business objectives, but crucially we're communicating with people across the organisation, or we're helping our clients communicate with people across the organisation so they understand, why are we doing this? What's the purpose? How does this link to my expectations and my objectives, and how does it link to the organisational objectives? So this is where I wanted to use the poll really, and just to see, because we certainly think this is a crucial factor. I'm interested in what others think. So Don, if we can go to the poll. Let's skip the punchline. So I'm interested if you could have things like that. So within your organisation or organisation, are you supporting learning initiatives with effective communication? And to give you some indication of what we might mean by this, so not at all would be maybe we just send them an email and let them know the course is there. A bit might be, well, we do some communication around our learning initiatives. Maybe we put something in the corporate newsletter, or we have a little something on the intranet. If you're doing quite a lot, you're probably using multiple channels. You're probably also understanding that you have different audiences who are very important. So you have learners who you need to communicate with, but you also have the line managers who are supporting that learning, and you're using multiple channels to reach different audiences. And if you're doing full and comprehensive communication, then you're really understanding that you have that whole range of different audiences. You're designing messages specifically for those different audiences. You're using a range of channels to reach them, and crucially, you're communicating back to the business about the successes and achievements.
Shall we see the results? I'd be very interested, by the way, if anyone wants to share what they're doing in the text chat area. Rob has said, I answered full and comprehensive, but not necessarily effective, which I think is very honest, Rob.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So there's the results, clustered as we might expect, around a bit and a lot, with just over 10% saying not at all, and just over 5% saying full and comprehensive. Interesting. Any thoughts on that, Owen?
Well, it is very. I think it's probably somewhere where we might expect, and it's good to see, though. I think that there's certainly a recognition. I think you'd say from that outcome of the importance of communication. That it isn't just enough to build it, put it there, and people will come to it. And I think generally there is an understanding now that we need to move beyond that, and we need to be communicating with people and involving them more. So I think it's good to see that. I think those figures reflect that. Full and comprehensive communication is tough to achieve. It's a significant additional part of the project. So I'm not surprised to see that many people feel they're not quite there yet.
Interesting, Alan, e-learning dude, has emails teaser animations, a weekly account. I like the idea of teaser animations going out as part of the communication. And I suppose, Owen, is it your experience that sometimes the communication can overlap into some of the materials you're creating as well, particularly?
Well, it absolutely does, and that's a very interesting point that's going to come on to you. That's something that that we're doing quite a lot of now. It's absolutely integrating those channels, and it's something that we when we talk with our clients, we talk to them about campaigning for change. So seeing, if you want to achieve a change in behaviour, a sustained change in behaviour, often that's how you have to look at it. So yes, you're going to be providing learning, which is going to be helping people understand, what the change is or what they need to do. But then to embed that, you're going to have to be constantly reinforcing that, giving opportunities for people to practice and reflect on it. And so yeah, absolutely seeing learning as part of, or achieving change through learning as part of a campaign sustained over a significant period, I think is the most realistic way to look at how you do achieve behavioural change.
Cool.
Excellent. Well, thanks very much for that, everyone. And we can come back and maybe talk about some of those specific communication interventions as we go and at the end. So just to give you an idea, I hope that we achieve fairly full and comprehensive communication with HC1. That was certainly our intention. And just to give you an idea of what some of that looked like, here, these are some of the interventions that we used. And this was all based on what we might call a formal communication planning exercise. So we worked specifically with stakeholders of HC1 to design a communication plan to support the launch of the programme. And so, as I said, crucial in that is understanding the different audiences that you have to reach, and those audiences require different messages depending on what it is they have to do to make the project a success.
Owen, I'll just interrupt you for a second. How long did all this take? It's a question that popped up. There's also the cost question, which I'll ask you to deal with at the end, because there's going to be lots of different parts of that. But in terms of the communication as part of the overall project, obviously it's ongoing. Can you just give us an idea of how long this took?
Well, the communication took as long as the project. So we were, as I say, well, it's still going. So 2.5 years is the short answer. Yep. But so I think that's a crucial thing. The communication began at the start of the project, really. So that was communication with the board. It was communication with people who were going to be crucial in rolling it out. So you can see learning. I put on here learning facilitators. Learning facilitators were the people who did a lot of the face-to-face training. They're well known on the sites. They're people who get out to the business. So very early on in the process, it was crucial to engage with them, give them the kinds of messages that we wanted taken out and that we needed people to be hearing on the sites. So it's a very good point. Absolutely, it really is. If you're doing full and comprehensive communication, then your communication is going to last as long as your project lasts, I think. So you can see, a variety of the channels that we used here. It's important to say that by communication we don't simply mean posters, newsletters, maybe even the teaser mail. We mean working with your champions and your ambassadors and people who get out there and are trusted within the organisation and who are in many ways the most powerful way of getting new messages out. And the other thing to emphasise here, I think as you said, is that the communication doesn't stop. And a particularly important new strand that comes in post-launch is communicating back to the business about the successes of the intervention. So we use a huge variety of different channels. You can see some of them here. For example, if we pick out one like Touch Ambassadors, so every single care home at HC1 has what's called a Touch Ambassador. This is an individual who's specifically trained in supporting colleagues in accessing and using the learning. So they are the kind of local go-to person. And again, it was very important to equip them, obviously with that specific knowledge, so they could support their colleagues, but also with these key messages of why are we doing this? How is it going to make a difference for you? What do you need to do in order to be able to engage with it? So that's probably enough on communication for now. I mean, it was, in a sense, a project in itself, and there is a lot to talk about there. But we'll leave it for now and move on to get to one of those other questions that was asked early on, is to really look at impact. And so I want to start looking at outcomes now and do that at a series of different levels, really. So the first level is what we might call adoption. So we were taking learning technologies out to this large and widely distributed organisation, which had a sort of, like most care businesses, a kind of resistance to using learning technologies. So how effective were these alignment and engagement strategies and the communication at getting buy-in, getting people to actually engage with it, use the learning, and provide them with a decent learning experience? And the outcome results were fantastic. So effectively at HC1 there is 100% adoption, so if effectively all users are live on the system, that's 15,000 people. Now these figures are a bit out of date now. I haven't updated this slide for a little while, but about 18 months after launch, 325,000 e-learning courses had been completed by colleagues at HC1, and that was equivalent to 280,000 hours of learning time delivered. So you can see that this is now a fully embedded part of the working experience at HC1. So adoption, great, people are using it, but what do they think about it? Well, we've done very extensive evaluation of the learner experience, the user experience. We ran an online evaluation survey. We had over 4,500 responses to that. And we were getting over 90% approval ratings from colleagues across a whole range of questions. And those were questions which were about, some directly about the learning experience. So, did you find this easy to use? Did you, was it easy to navigate around the materials? Through to questions like, do you think this is going to have a positive impact on your work? And questions related to much more to people's work experience. So we had great adoption, and we had a great outcomes from users in terms of their experience of the learning. So moving on a bit more to business impact, a specific target for Touch at HC1 was to transform the picture of compliance. So obviously compliance is a crucial business metric in such a highly regulated sector as the care sector. When HC1 took over, the compliance picture was absolutely all over the place, and they had to get hold of it. So they set a quite ambitious target for their new learning program, which was to achieve 85% of certified compliance. So that's people having completed the right training and the business knowing about it within 12 months of launch, and that Touch actually exceeded that target and achieved it within about 8 months of launch. Another very important business outcome, which is one impact measure, certainly not the be-all and end-all, was the cost-saving return on investment, or the saving in the direct costs of training. Now, because of the previous training model, as I said before, HC1 was primarily classroom-based, and this is a huge cost for HC1 or any care provider, because of course colleagues on a training course have to be covered on their shift, and those backfill costs, as they refer to them, are huge. The huge advantage of moving over to a blended learning solution where learning is integrated into workflow and people are largely able to complete their learning as part of their regular shift pattern is those backfill costs are massively reduced. And again, I haven't really followed through on this graph, but in the first year of Touch being live, HC1 achieved a saving in the direct cost of training delivery of over £4 million. And that includes the development costs of the project. So is a very, very significant business impact and return for them. But on to that other point, and again, it was a question that was raised earlier, thanks Don for flagging it up, is the hardest one of all really, which is, what difference is this making for care, for the experience of residents of HC1, and how can we assess that? And so this really gets, I think, down to that key issue of colleague engagement, this critical issue in care of engagement and accountability. And why this is such a crucial driver for care providers is exemplified really by, if you take the example of the mid-stats scandal, one of the really disturbing outcomes, I think, for care providers from that was a lot of the people who were implicated in that scandal and have subsequently been struck off, or even in some cases have received sort of custodial punishments, was that they were apparently competent, trained people, experienced people in some cases. So a crucial question is, why weren't they doing what they knew to do, what they were trained to do? And one aspect of that, which is very current in care at the moment, is engagement. Is engagement with their work, motivation, and with the, engagement with the people that they're working with. So it was a key outcome from Touch was to build colleague engagement. And so a couple of the ways that we can look at that are, one of the ways was using the staff survey. So there's an explicit question in the HC1 staff survey, which is, what is the best thing that HC1 has done for you in the last 12 months? And we can look at sorry, I skipped it there. We can look at, this is the word cloud response to that question. Now again, there are, I think, over 4,000 responses to the HC1 staff survey. And this is the word cloud response to, what is the best thing that HC1 has done for you at work? And so this was the question asked after Touch was released. And going beyond that, really, and drilling a bit deeper into the staff survey, what we did was we looked at a series of measures called the Gallup 12. Some of you may be familiar with this. The Gallup 12 are a standard set of questions. They are, I suppose, promoted by the Gallup organisation, and they are the 12 questions which have been shown by Gallup in surveys involving millions of employees in thousands of different organisations to be the 12 questions that relate most effectively to colleague engagement, and then through to quality, safety, productivity, those sorts of measures. So we looked at these 12 questions from the HC1 staff survey and looked at the change before and after the release of Touch. And what we found was, on average, there was a 10% increase in the scores for those questions after the launch of Touch. So a very clear indicator in this key business metric that staff engagement is increasing. And for those of you that are familiar with the Gallup 12 and using them, to achieve a 3 or 4% increase in these measures in a year is considered very significant. So a 10% increase is a huge increase in staff engagement in 1 year. So these were strong indicators that Touch is having an impact in this crucial area, and then consequently on care. Now, a couple of other ways we can look at that. We did a survey 1 year after the launch of Touch, asking home managers to rate the impact for the operation of their care home, in terms of people's competence, in terms of how people are delivering the kindest care in their judgment. And again, we got very, very strong indicators from that there has been a positive difference, a positive impact on the quality of care since the launch of Touch. And the final measure, again, which is again probably one of the best or clearest measures that a care provider like HC1 can have of the quality of their care, is to look at regulatory inspection outcomes of them. So obviously they are very highly regulated. They have inspectors assessing the quality of their care, and their goal is to be compliant with all their requirements. And when we're talking about regulatory inspection levels of compliance, we're not talking about a kind of checkbox exercise here. Again, this is the equivalent of sort of Ofsted for care homes. So inspectors are talking to residents and their relatives, they're watching care in practice, and they're observing what is going on. So these are probably the closest we can get to a measure of has the quality of care changed. And the crucial metric for the way we looked at this in terms of trying to assess the impact of touch on this was to look at the levels of non-compliance prior to the launch of touch and levels of non-compliance after the launch of touch. So for each home, the most recent inspection before and the most recent inspection after. And what we were able to see there was a 20% reduction in the levels of non-compliance. Now this obviously is very sensitive. That's why there aren't numbers on this graph. This is sensitive information for a care provider. And I should very clearly say that non-compliance does not indicate some great hazard or there is a crisis or there is great risk to safety. Many areas of non-compliance will be to do with administration, bookkeeping, very small areas. But nevertheless, it is a crucial metric for the organisation because these things are published. These are how people are assessing, whether they want to put their resident into a particular care home. So this is a really crucial business measure, and we can see evidence for the impact of touch on that. So,
okay, I think we give a lot of chat around this, Owen, and it is the crucial bit that all of these presentations about case studies come down to, which is how do we show there was an impact? And for me, this slide with it's probably fewer than 20 words and one line on it, 3 lines, is the crucial slide. And I just want to ask a question. We can't, unfortunately. Helen says, well, 20% reduction on what? What was the non-compliance rate before? Am I correct in saying, Owen, it's simply not possible to give those numbers out?
Yeah, I mean that's very sensitive information for a care home provider. So I think all we can say, it is very difficult to point to specific. What's vital for them and for any care home provider is that trend is downward, and it is one of the indicators of the impact. So I wouldn't say this is it. It's all about this. It's about promoting staff engagement. It's about home managers reporting the impact in their organisation. It's about seeing that levels of non-compliance are falling. This is what the impact is.
And one other point here, Fanny says, Don, it doesn't equate to improvement in care always, especially if the previous standards were very low. I would say that, actually, if the previous standards were low and there's been an improvement, then it's an improvement. The question is whether it's an improvement to a satisfactory level. Is there any? Well,
I think we've got to be very careful. There are, the levels at HC1 care homes are of a good standard. They're trying to improve them.
And I was going to ask Andrew's question.
That's very important to say here.
Yes.
I think, you're absolutely right. The question is, well, how do you show that someone's kindness has improved? Well, that's very, very difficult.
Well,
Very multifaceted measure.
I don't want to stop you doing the presentation. I want to get through the rest of the questions. That is the key question. How do you show that? And I think the answer, as I've said in the chat, is, look, it's not possible to isolate training as the factor in something as vague as that. But you can collect a group of proxy indicators, which I think you've done very well here.
Exactly. That's what I'm saying. The indicators are, that people are engaged and are using now, learning and development is an embedded part of their working experience. They are enjoying that experience. They, measured levels of compliance are rising. Engagement is rising. Managers report impact on services, and external regulators show impact on services.
2 last very quick questions on this one. So, firstly, is there any sense of how HC1 is comparing against competitors?
No, is the short answer to that. I don't think that they or all other competitors would be willing to share these things.
There's no school ranking table, if you like, for this. Okay.
No, and it's also because they're very
different.
The contexts are so different. Healthcare providers pitch themselves at all different sorts of levels. The services they provide are different. I think ultimately the bottom line is the safety and health of the people that they care for.
The other question. Sorry, Owen, go on.
Yeah.
Well, the other question I was going to ask was, and let's not spend too long on this because we could spend the whole day on it. How do we know it was the training that had the impact? And I'm actually going to answer that question myself very quickly now. We can't isolate that as the sole factor because it's notoriously difficult, but it's particularly difficult, even if you're measuring something as difficult as clear as sales results, it's difficult to do it. In something as vague as this, it's even more difficult. But presumably we can say that touch has been used by everybody in the organisation, and there are a few types of organisation which are more based on what people do day to day, which was directly affected by the training, than a care home. And therefore, although we can't isolate the training must have been one of, if not a major influencer in the change.
Absolutely, and I think what we would say as well is that, as well as the specific learning messages, so that how you maybe are looking out to check whether someone has a pressure sore, or where you're storing particular medications, those kind of specific learning messages. The critical change, the transformational change for HC1 has been re-engaging colleagues with the vocational care. And that has been achieved by writing those messages into every learning experience.
And I think that's great. And Jeremy has just pointed out, by the way, this is great work. I don't want you to feel you're at some sort of parliamentary committee or an inquisition. This is the stuff we care about, which is why we're asking
exactly right. And I think it's really, it's absolutely the heart of the challenge, really. And I think care providers probably always feel there to an extent, the kind of parliamentary debate on trials, because of the kind of stories that hit the news, and I think it's very important. Not for 1 second do HC1 believe that they have cracked it. It's just an ongoing challenge to ensure their staff are doing the right things, that they're feel supported, that they're motivated, that they're engaged, and that they're keeping people safe. And it just doesn't stop. And certainly, I don't think they would. This has had huge impact for them. It continues to have huge impact, but it's an ongoing piece of work, and it's for all care providers.
Carry on with the Cavendish review, then let's wrap up and jump into it.
Yeah, so really, it was another. I think again to try to get at that, where does it sit in context? That's interesting. Perhaps that we can say that some comparison between care providers. This final slide really perhaps gives some indication of where this sits in the sector. The Cavendish review was established as a result of the Francis report, which was conducted into the Midstats scandal. So. And because one of the findings of the Francis report was this issue about the support, training, and engagement of carers. And so the Cavendish review was led by, so the Secretary of State commissioned the Cavendish review to look into that specific question. And it was led by Camilla Cavendish, who I think is Deputy Editor of the Times now, but she's been a campaigning journalist on healthcare and care issues. And as a part of the Cavendish review, healthcare businesses, both private and public sector, from across the UK were invited to take part, to talk about what they do, how they try and address these questions. And HC1 was one of these, one of those providers, of course, and Touch was a very large part of their submission and what they talked about with Camilla Cavendish. And as a result of that, Touch at HC1 was picked out as a best practice case study in the Cavendish Review report. So I guess that perhaps gives some indication within the sector, of where it sits and how it's regarded, perhaps compared with other organisations, what other organisations are doing. So that is the case study, really. And I think, clearly, I think it's interesting, actually, perhaps inevitably, a lot of the debate inevitably will be around, how do you measure kindness, and then how do you show that that learning has impacted on that? And it's a very valid point, and I think that we know, well, we know from what HC1 tell us and the kind of hierarchy of outcome measures that I've shown, that learning and development and e-learning has been a driver of change, and very positive change at HC1. And as I said, really, in the threads that we've tried to build, I think that the reason that that's been achieved, the kind of guidelines really that have kept that on track and kept us focused on delivering those objectives have been to keep everything aligned with that core vision of delivering the kindest care, and to really reach out and build engagement with colleagues, engagement with learning and development, and how that can help them achieve personal objectives as well as how it helps the organisation achieve its objectives. So for a bit more on that, there are a couple of links here. So there's a bit more on the case study from the link at the top there on our website. And there's also, I've included here, we sponsored a report that Towards Maturity did. The report was actually first done last year. It's about how you build alignment with learning technologies, and it's just been refreshed for 2014, and that's available from their website. So that's it really. That's the story of Touch at HC1. As I say, it's an ongoing story. We're still working. It's still being developed, and it's still having a very significant impact for them. So we've picked up quite a few questions as we've gone along.
Which we don't possibly have time to answer. So I have to jump to the first one. I'm sorry, can I just say, Owen, thank you very much. I felt at the end I was giving you a grilling there, but you know, we all care about this stuff so much. Probably all of us, one way or the other, have got elderly relatives. I have, who are in a care home, or not actually in a hospital right now, almost certainly going to go into a care home. And this is stuff we care about personally. As professionals, we care about it. We're not trying to beat you up. We're delighted that you produced a great sort of suite of reports that add to the evidence. We had questions right at the beginning. How do we prove value? And I think the answer is you can't isolate it in the way you could a simple ROI. And we should get rid of the word ROI, or the term, and focus on value. I love the idea that there's a clear strategic objective of care and kindness. There were 3 guiding principles, and I think you talked us through that beautifully. Impact. Can we say which button at this end caused that effect there? No. Can we say overall there was an effect? I think almost certainly we can. But the one question in the back of everybody's mind, how much did it all cost? You don't have to answer, because it's a long project, it's a commercially sensitive thing, and Gordon's just thrown it up again. Did we get a ballpark figure on the budget for this? So can you mention anything about money at all, Owen? You don't have to. But
Well, I mean...
It's commercially sensitive.
I mean, obviously, this was, they're a large organisation. This was a significant investment, and I suppose what I could say was, obviously, across the whole, if you take say that the first years of the project, the first year of the project to launch, perhaps we could say it was a 6-figure investment that gave a 7-figure return. It might be one way of
all right.
saying that. But in terms of, what I would say, there's 2 things I would say on that really, is one way we can think about this is in cost per head of training completion. And we did a lot of work with HC1, really looking into that, trying to really look at it in some detail. And in year 1, if we factor in all of the development costs into the cost of delivering training via e-learning, and we compare that with their face-to-face training model, I think, I can't remember the precise figures off the top of my head, but in year 1, the cost of a classroom training course, I think including backfill for colleagues, even taking quite a conservative approach on that, was around £40 for a half-day course for an individual. The cost of the same course delivered via e-learning, factoring in all of the development costs per person, was about £6.95. In year 2, if we take year 2, so we only have to now factor in the ongoing maintenance costs of the e-learning, not the development costs. The comparative cost of the classroom course is still £40, that hasn't really changed, but their cost per head of delivering via e-learning is down to less than £1 per head.
I love the fact you're talking about pence rather than pounds, and that's a more comprehensive answer to the cost question I was expecting, so thank you for that.
But what I would say, I hope that, this was a big project and tackling big issues and had a very significant impact. But I hope all the principles of alignment, of engagement, of communication, of some of the things we embedding the vision and values, of using the blend, all of those are scale independent.
I love that. That's absolutely true. The time's winged chariot is drawing near. Fiona has been patient and insistent about a question she wanted the involvement of patients and families in the initial stakeholder conversations or the construction of materials. How much did you actually talk to people outside the care home setting?
Yeah, that's a very good question. Thank you for that, Fiona. Patients and relatives were involved in the initial consultation, and they were involved as well in the creation of materials. So quite a lot of the learning materials have video or audio or case study stories, and they have direct video contribution from in some cases from patients, in some cases from relatives.
Okay, brilliant, and that's good to hear. Or you mentioned bring your own device. People were using their own mobile devices. Any tech issues, security issues with that?
I wouldn't say security issues. I mean, there are tech issues there, and I think we should say that is that is something that's in transition and is developing. So the use of mobile devices we've actually moved. So for about the last 6 months, everything that we are developing on the e-learning platform is in responsive format, so that people can it will work well on mobile and on device or on any device. So that's I would say to an extent is enabling that, empowering that mobile use is something of a work in progress. But certainly it has proved very popular, and I suppose it's the interesting thing that is that possibly within a working environment and with a workforce where you might not expect it, actually tablet and device use is very high, and people are keen to be able to use those to access the learning materials.
I did find the story you had about people finishing on their own time very interesting. Simon asked a question about that, but he's also asked another question. We only have time for one last question. I'm going to ask this question raised by Simon D. I think we'll answer this at the end of every webinar we do. I'm going to call this the Simon question from now on. And the question is, what's the one thing you would have done differently to improve things?
Yes, what a good question.
And you can't say, I wanted to be more perfect. I was so on time.
I think we would have more fully realised the blend right from the start of the project. And if I can say what I mean by that, I think we went into the project along with HC1 as well, based on prior experience we had, thinking the core of these things is what we might call a conventional e-learning module, that covers all the bases, and then we'll extend that by using the blend and using that to embed that. I think we now much more. We don't work to that model. We start with almost a blank sheet of paper and we say, how are we going to do this and what are we going to put where? And I think, if I could change one thing, we would have used that approach right from the start.
Very interesting, and a subtle one, but it does show, doesn't it, how our preconceptions, our experience affect our choices. I guess the next project you'll approach differently. Look, we're over time already. Can I just say, everybody, thank you very much for your input. I've got to say thank you to Owen Rose of Acteon. We've hauled the man over the coals with our question about return on investment or value, and he stalwartly stood up and I think also presented something which is a great case study that really illustrates some of the things that we should aspire to when we're trying to implement a learning technology solution. That business of having the principle, having the few guiding lights that take us through it, and in particular, the embedding piece. I think that was so important. Not trying to make out it's something outside it. No, it's part of work. And therefore, you actually have the effect you want to have, rather than, as you were saying, in that awful business, you go from here to the classroom, something happens in the classroom, and guess what? It's back to work as usual. Wow. Okay, I love that. Listen, this was, as always, a wonderful presentation from the Learning and Skills Group, and if you enjoyed it, please, I say we didn't do the presentation, Owen Rose of Acteon did the presentation, but if you enjoyed it, please use the hashtag #LSG Webinar on Twitter to tell the world about it, and the chat, the slides, the recording will all be available in your peer group online community, the Learning and Skills Group. 7,000 people await your contributions on the forums there, so please chip in, and it will be available on the webinar archive, that bit in the circle, on Monday. And it only remains for me to say, please put a date in your diary for the 3rd of July. We have an event on the 17th, and then we get back together again online on the 3rd of July. I very much look forward to seeing you then. It only remains for me to say once again, thank you everybody in the room. And Owen, thank you very much for showing us how we really can support business transformation with learning technology.
Thanks, all.